Okay, once again, welcome everybody, and I'm very glad that you've decided to join us today. So we've been looking at the Buddha's Noble Eightfold Path, and so far we've looked at right understanding, right thought, and right speech. And today we're going to have a look at Samma Kammanta, right action. And as we said before you set out on a journey, you've got to have some idea of where you're going to go. And you've got to know sort of how to get where you're going. You need to know the bus schedules or the train schedules or something like that. And that's why perfect understanding or right understanding is so important. It's the beginning of the journey. It's the orientation, the preparation as to what the path is for and what the goal of the path is and what have you. And then the next ones that we looked at was thought, speech, today action, and next week livelihood. And so you can say that this is, so first of all, you've orientated yourself. Secondly, you've got to bring about changes in your behavior. In other words, you have to become a better person, give up bad habits, start developing certain attitudes and outlooks, what we would call developing ethics. And this is why thought, speech, action, and livelihood are so important. Now, we said last week that you don't attain enlightenment or one of the states leading to enlightenment by being a good person. That doesn't mean you shouldn't be a good person, but enlightenment's doesn't depend on being a good person. It depends on a profound and life-changing understanding. However, ethical behavior is important because it's a foundation to move higher. And this is why these are the second steps on the path after your orientation. Now, it is common in some places nowadays that people are only interested in meditation. Meditation is very popular nowadays. Mindfulness. Everybody wants to do mindfulness. That's good. But quite often they're not really interested in anything else. They just want the mindfulness. Well, according to the Buddhist understanding is that's good, but the fruits of that meditation practice are going to be limited unless it goes hand in hand with behavioral change. And that's why the second tier of steps on the path are about ethics. Okay, having said that, today we're going to have a look at the next, thought, speech, and action. I've often find that people sort of have a bit of a confusion about where you get the steps from. They get the steps mixed up. It's not so important, but I always encourage people to think of it like this. If you go to, say, Buddha Gaya, where the Buddha was enlightened, and I hope all of you will have the opportunity to go there someday. It's a very wonderful place. You see people, particularly Tibetans, doing their prostrations. And how they do their prostrations is if you watch them, they go, and then they bow down, and then they do it again and again and again. And I think that's a very helpful way of remembering it. First of all, you've got right understanding, orientation. Then you've got thought, speech, and then action, your body. So it's right thought, right understanding, right thought, speech, action. Easy to remember. What does this entail? Well, I think that the thing that we can use for this is the 5 precepts. And the 5 precepts are to avoid harming others, to avoid stealing, to avoid sexual misconduct, to avoid lying, and to avoid taking drugs and intoxicants. But you can see it like this. The first precept has got what we call a varita and a charita angle. So the varita angle is to avoid doing this, that is, harming other beings. And the charita action, the charita angle, is to enhance life. The next one is to avoid stealing, to avoid taking what belongs to others. And the charita action is to share with others what belongs to you. In the case of the third precept, it is to avoid certain taking advantage of people sexually and for your pleasure generally. And the charita side to that is upholding and respecting people's dignity. And then the fourth one is the varita action is to avoid lying or dissembling speech. And the charita action is to speak the truth, speak pleasantly, kindly, and so on. And the last one is to avoid those things which intoxicate or dull consciousness, and rather to do that which enhances the natural clarity of your mind. So you can take these varita side of the 5 precepts as being a fairly good guide to what right action would be. So let's have a look at them. So the first, I would say, the first type of example of right action would be enhancing life. First of all, avoiding harming and hurting and making trouble for living beings. And the charita side of this would be doing what you can to enhance life. And there are quite a few things that you can think of if you put your mind to it of what this means. In the book, the textbook that we're using, All About Buddhism, I start by giving examples of what the Buddha did to enhance the lives of others. And the first thing that comes to mind is something perhaps we mentioned last week. That is looking after those who are sick. Now, you can't look after everybody who's sick, but members of your family or close friends. You hear that, say, a friend is ill. And one thing you can do, a kind action, a helpful action, is to do what you can to make them feel better. Now, in the time of the Buddha, really, medical treatment was only available to small numbers of people. When you got sick, you were in trouble. Your life may have to depend upon members of your family or members of your community. And you find, as I think we mentioned last week, is if you actually look through the Tipitaka, you find that the Buddha very frequently visited people who were ill, and not just monks and nuns, but his lay disciples and other people as well, people he knew. When he knew that somebody was sick, he would go and visit them. And when I was doing some research on this, unfortunately, I only found this out after I wrote my book on the life of the Buddha. But the Buddha visited people very frequently when he always found time to visit those who were sick when he heard about it. And researchers now found that the more friends, family, and loved ones visit people who are sick, the less time they spend in hospital. So there seems to be a measurable relationship between the amount of time somebody in a hospital has with loved ones and friends, the quicker they heal. Now, there was other things that has to be taken into account. Then it depends on what the illness is. If it's serious but not too serious, this definitely is the case. There seems to be something about knowing that people are concerned about you, and care about you enough to actually get in a car or a bus to come to the hospital and say hello to you and ask you how you're doing on. This really helps people to heal. And I imagine that that's why the Buddha did it so often. And I imagine that that's why he did it. He undoubtedly knew this. So this would be an example of doing what you can to enhance the lives of others. A friend of mine in Sri Lanka is a very untraditional Buddhist, a little bit dissatisfied with the traditional customs and traditions related to Buddhism in Sri Lanka. And in Sri Lanka, what happens is when somebody passes away, 7 days later, they give a dana to the local monks. They will invite the monks for a meal. The whole family, the whole clan will gather together. They serve the monks the food, and then they transfer the merit, that's what they call it, or they dedicate the merit to the person who passed away. And then every year on the death anniversary of that person, they'll do the same thing. Anyway, this person told me that his mother's dana was coming up. And I said, oh, how many monks are you going to invite? And he said, I'm not going to invite any. I said, what about me? He said, no, nowadays we don't do that anymore. I said, really, what do you do? And he said, instead of giving a meal to the monks, what I do is I go to the children's ward in the local hospital, this is the Kandy Hospital, and I provide a nutritious, nourishing, and nice meal for every child in the hospital. And I thought, what a wonderful idea. Why do we have to keep on doing the same old traditions that have been done for centuries? There's nothing wrong with those traditions, but couldn't we think of creative ways of expanding that idea? Generally speaking, monks have no problems about getting meals. In countries like Sri Lanka, in hospitals, well, they're not like hospitals in Singapore and Malaysia. The food is not always the best, and sometimes people in hospitals are rather poor. Members of their family can't come all of the time to bring them nutritious food they need, etc. So what this person does is he enhances life by taking the lives of others, by taking a traditional custom and just doing it in a more creative way. And I think that if somebody is thinking seriously about Buddhism, I think you can think of other ways that you can do this sort of thing. Anyway, that would be an example, I would say, of enhancing the lives of others. While we're on this subject of right behavior, right action, I thought it might be useful very briefly to, in an aside, and talk about another action pertaining to food, and that is the question of vegetarianism. And I always have thought that there are three things that people can become very, very over-emotional about. They can become rather obsessive about. One of them is food. Another one is health. And another one is sickness. So the other one is religion. So you find, whenever you find con men and bad people exploiting people, quite often it's something to do with health. They've now discovered a way to cure cancer. Or it's got something to do with religion. They're enlightened, or God's talking to them and giving them special messages. or sickness. That is, we're selling this wonderful thing. It's a herb that grows in the Himalayas and you can live for 150 years if you eat it. These fields are just seem to be full of frauds and people who fall for the frauds. And in relation to food and Buddhism, sometimes the question of vegetarianism becomes something of an obsession and sometimes arouses quite strong negative feelings one way or another. Now, exactly what the Buddha said about vegetarianism is very clear. There is no place. The Buddha had many opportunities to encourage people to be vegetarian or to make a rule that you shouldn't eat meat, and he didn't do it. Now, as why that is so, I think there's possible explanations for that. But this is what I always say. If you wish to be a vegetarian, be a vegetarian. I think it's a good thing. But don't start judging others who are not vegetarian. Don't start trying to become an evangelist for vegetarianism. Do your own practice. Let people know if they invite you to their home that you prefer not to eat meat. No problem. But if you become obsessed with this idea, and I'm afraid it does tend to happen, then I think it's rather unhealthy. And I know I've met some people who are call themselves Buddhist, and really the only thing they know or practice about Buddhism is vegetarianism. It's taken over everything else. And the reality is that the Buddha never said that anywhere that it is necessary or it is good to be vegetarian. So do keep that in mind. And if you're going to be a vegetarian, be a nice vegetarian. Don't judge others. And remember that's a good thing, but there's much, much more to Buddhism than what you put in your mouth. That's what I think. Okay. The second one is in the precepts is to avoid taking what belongs to others, but rather sharing what belongs to you with others. In other words, giving. There are several Pali words for this. Dana is the most well-known one, but chaga is another one. So we can say giving and sharing. And traditionally in Buddhism, they say that there are 4 types of giving or sharing. The first one is animisadana, which is the giving of material things, food, for example. The second one is paricharya, which is the gift of work. The third one is abhayadana, which is the gift of fearlessness. And the last one is dhammadana, the gift of truth, or the gift of the Dhamma. Let's have a look at them. So the first one is fairly clear, giving or sharing or donating material things. So you give somebody some food, you share your food with somebody, or you make a donation to a worthwhile charity, or whatever it happens to be. I've always found that being a monk, you have much less opportunities of sharing with others other than Dhammadana. People don't like to, if a monk's got something, and monks tend to be receivers of things rather than having too many opportunities of sharing things with others. But I'll tell you a rather amusing story that happened to me. I was in Austria, traveling on a train. I was going from one Buddhist center to another. And before I left, very kindly, the people there, some people had cooked a lovely cake, and they wrapped it up in foil, cut it into pieces so it'd be easy for me to eat while on the journey. Anyway, it's a rather conservative country, and they generally look at people dressed in like this and sort of look away and look disapprovingly. Not hostile, but disapprovingly. Who the hell is this guy? Anyway, I got into the train, and this one man had the newspaper up in front of him, and he saw me and put the newspaper. So we were traveling along for quite some time, and everybody looked away from me. Nobody spoke to me. Anyway, I thought, that cake, I could feel it. It was still warm. So it made me feel hungry. So I opened it up and I had this lovely cake. And I turned to the man with the newspaper and said, would you like a piece of cake? I said, no, have a piece of cake. It's okay. So eventually he took one. And then I offered one to the other one. And then to the lady opposite me. And she hesitatingly took it. And from that time onwards, people started talking, not only with me, but with others as well. It was a really wonderful experience. The only problem was it left me with less cake to eat, but, what can you do? Sharing with others, particularly with strangers, can be a wonderful way of opening doors and getting to know people better. And of course, there are so many other ways that you can share too. Then there is the gift of work. I think this one's important. I have noticed that in some Buddhist societies or temples, you often find that there's a small number of people who do so much. They arrange the seating for the talk, or they come early and arrange the flowers for the shrine. I know in Singapore and Chinese Buddhist centers, there's always ladies in the kitchen getting the food ready and all of this sort of thing. And so there's a certain group of people who are like that. And then there's a certain group of people who do absolutely nothing. When everything's over, they don't help to clean up or anything like that. That's unfortunate. Huh? I think that the gift of work, that is doing something for others in the form of work, of helping them with some task or some job that needs to be done, is a very, very good thing to do. It's as much dana as inviting some monks to a meal and giving them a meal. Once again, I'll give you an example of this. When I first returned to Australia, I wasn't living here, I was living somewhere else. And once again, a monk in the neighborhood, and who the hell is this guy? Is he Hare Krishna, is he? What is he? I don't know. Anyway, the people next to me, they saw me several times, but they never spoke to me. And then one day when I was coming back from the shops, I noticed him and his wife, they had a sort of a gate. You had a thing like this and then the gate automatically opened, and there was something wrong with it. And he was trying to fix it and she was holding the gate up. And obviously there was some sort of problem, and it was difficult for the two of them to solve the problem. I noticed this, so I put down my groceries and said, would you need a second pair of hands? Oh, thank you so much. And I helped her hold up this thing while the husband did that. And from that time on, we became friendly. So once again, contributing what you can to a situation that requires something to be done, this is a good action. This is right action. And it's particularly so when it comes to Buddhist groups, Buddhist temples, or Buddhist societies. Don't be a leaner, be a lifter. Come ask what can be done. What can I do to help? Or sometimes simply take the initiative to do something. So that's the gift of work. Then there's the gift of fearlessness, abhayadana. You know, in the Buddhist tradition, you have Buddha images, Buddha rupas, and their hands are always in a particular gesture called a mudra. This gesture, and then one hand in the lap, one hand touching the earth, And then and then there's the teaching mudra like that. And one of the classical mudras is this, the hand up like this. And this is called the Abhaya mudra, the Buddha giving fearlessness. The Buddha encouraging people, speaking to them or telling them things that helps them to overcome their anxieties, their fears, or their uncertainties. And the Bayadana, I think, takes the form of when people are worried, talking to them, or at least listening to them. When people are concerned about their health, for example, talking to them or listening to them. When people are grieving, being there for them. Sometimes not necessary to say anything when somebody's grieving, just simply to be there with an arm over their shoulder or something like this. All of these things, I think, could be called giving others fearlessness and courage. And then finally, we've got the gift of the Dhamma. And I think everybody knows in the Dhammapada, the Buddha says, of all types of giving, the highest is giving of the Dhamma. Because in giving that, you may very well give the person something that changes for the better their whole life. There is a long tradition in Buddhism of this. It takes many forms, as it does today. So somebody may invite a Dhamma teacher and make all arrangements for them to give a talk. Or they may make a donation to printed Dhamma book for free distribution. Or they may talk to their friend or their friends about the Dhamma. There are many ways that you can do this. Once again, I think to some degree Buddhists have a bit of a problem. They seem to think that talking about the Dhamma is the job of the monks. Or sometimes they might like to talk about the Dhamma, but they're not confident enough. Many times, I think, especially in Malaysia and Singapore, people simply couldn't do it because they really don't know very much. They've never taken the time to learn the Dhamma at a deeper level. Now, to give the gift of the Dhamma, you do not have to know Pali. You do not have to be an expert in Abhidhamma. But certainly, knowing the fundamentals and having the confidence to speak about it, this is something very important. And it's something that, well, if you contrast it with your Christian friends, well, they have no hesitations. They joyfully share the Dhamma with others, sometimes perhaps over-enthusiastically, but nonetheless, if you have a Christian friend, chances are they've tried to share their Dhamma with you. Buddhists generally don't do that, and I think it's something that, first of all, we should respect those who do that, encourage those who do that, and then try to follow their example. The Dhamma is about the most precious thing that you can give to others. Be generous with it. So these are the three types of giving, dana or chaga, that the Buddha talks about. The gift of material things, the gift of work, the gift of fearlessness, and the gift of Dhamma. Now, the third type of right action or perfect action relates to the third precept. So, kami sumichachara means, basically, it really means going the wrong way for pleasure. So, kamesu, that's from the word karma, not from the word kamma. Kamma is about action and reaction. Karma is about pleasure, or actually, yes, pleasure. So probably all of you have heard of the famous ancient Indian text, the Kama Sutra. That's exactly what that means, the book of pleasure. Okay, so what does this actually mean? So usually it's understood as, you can say, the first thing that comes to mind would be adultery. That is, why is adultery would be breaking the precept? Because when you marry, doesn't matter which type of marriage ceremony you participate in, it usually includes some vow that you will be faithful to the person that you're marrying. The traditional Western one is for richer, for poorer, in sickness and health. In other words, you commit yourself fully to that particular person. So you've made that promise, you've made that vow. If you then break that vow, then I would say that you would be breaking the third precept. But there are other ways you can do that too. You can take advantage of a person's timidness to force yourself upon them. Or you could trick them into having sexual relationships with you when perhaps they don't really want to. There are many ways that this happens. Some people sometimes ask me, how can we explain the third precept to children? Well, if you think of karma or kamesu purely in terms of sex, then it might be a little bit, I had to be careful talking to small children about that. But if you understand it as for what it is, which is pleasure, then I could give an example of that, which a child could understand. If you watch children play, sometimes they can be quite nasty to each other, little devils. Making fun of another person, when children tend to sometimes do that, adults do too. That is, you hold somebody up to ridicule, you make them feel awful, humiliated, but you have a great time because you've made a joke about them. You're laughing at them. Everybody else is laughing at them. You have derived some pleasure at their expense. That, I would say, would be an example of breaking the third precept also. To ridicule somebody for the purposes of fun, which humiliates them and from which you derive great enjoyment. So that would be breaking the third precept. What would be the charita side of that? Would be respecting people's rights to choose, not pressuring them to do things that they do not want to do, especially if it's because you want something from them. You wish to derive some pleasure, some benefit from them. In other words, you would be respecting what we would call, you would be respecting their dignity. That would be an example of the charita side of the third precept. And then we come to the which is Sura Meriya Majja Pamadatana Veramani Sikapadang Samadhiyami, to avoid those substances, primarily alcohol, which cloud your mind, which confuse the natural clarity of consciousness. And this is really, in some sense, it goes to explaining what Buddhism is all about. And that is, the Buddha is really, one of the most crucial things in Buddhism is not faith, which may be crucial in other cultures and other religions. In Buddhism, the crucial thing is the mind. The Dhammapada starts with Mano Pangama Dhamma. Everything starts with the mind. Mind is the thing that creates so many problems for us if we don't understand it properly, or if we have little control over it. Mind is the thing that can eventually liberate us from samsara. So, from a Buddhist point of view, I would say that your mind might be even more important than your health, looked at from a spiritual point of view. So, something like what is now called recreational drugs. There's all sorts of awful things available now, from which you get great pleasure and you can become addicted to, but worst of all, which lead you to become psychologically confused, sometimes even unconscious. And unfortunately, the most widely available drug, which tends to be acceptable in probably most cultures, except in Islamic cultures, is alcohol. It's easily available, it's acceptable. In many countries, it's cheap. And from the point of view of spiritual growth, it's really very negative. So the charita side of the fifth precept would be keeping your mind clear in its natural state of clarity and doing what you can to develop it. And of course, a great deal of Buddhist practice is exactly that, basically what we would call meditation. Now, returning to alcohol, there are some times when it's actually even necessary to take alcohol. There are some types of medicine called tinctures, which have small amounts of alcohol in them. So it would be silly to say that if you take a medicine that has a numbing effect upon your consciousness, that would be breaking the five precepts. You're not taking it for that purpose. You're taking it to enhance your health. And as for other drugs, most of them, certainly in Singapore and Malaysia, are not only illegal, but they have really very serious implications if you get caught taking them. And it's a good thing too. I think any Buddhist, anybody who takes the Dhamma seriously, would avoid any form of recreational drugs, which would include alcohol. So these would just be some examples of right action. I'm sure we would all be able to think of others. Any actions that enhance the good would be examples of right action. And these two, speech and action, I would say would be very closely linked, because in speaking, in some sense, you are acting also. And ultimately, of these, it's hard to say which is the most consequential. But if I was asked what was the most consequential of the precepts and of right action, I would say avoiding alcohol and keeping your mind in its natural, clarified state. Because that is the aim, that is the goal, that is the culmination of the spiritual life. Akupa Chetu Vimukta, utter freedom of mind.
In medical, so if someone is terminally ill, that means they are dying, there's a practice which you give the selective medicine, meaning basically we just knock them out, let them feeling, you can say, or cannot be said is drunk.
You're a doctor, are you?
Yeah, I'm a doctor, yes.
Right, yeah.
So we can make them deeply unconscious about the dying process. So what do you think about this prospect? I mean, we shall let them have a clear mind when they are dying, or you want that we shall make them unconscious. So during the process. Okay, thanks, Bhante.
Okay, so let me get it clear. As I understand it, sometimes when a patient is perhaps near death, they're going to die in a day or two, and they're in great pain, you administer something to them that makes them unconscious. The idea being that in the few remaining hours or days that they've got left, that they will avoid pain because they'll be unconscious. Is that correct?
Yeah, the may or may not have pain. Some of them have pain. Yeah, some of them have pain. But some conditions which you know they are dying. Yeah, I do come across one. We know she is dying. She doesn't really have much pain, but because the pain, the death itself is, I think, is not so comfortable. Must be a not so nice experience because we know the secretion will be more. There will be sometimes you may lose your mind a bit of hallucinations. So there are medicine to counter all these symptoms. We said it's not like she or he definitely has some illnesses with pain. That will be really straightforward. I mean, we will just give medicine to the extent that the pain is gone. But there are conditions which they probably not much of pain, but you want to avoid the nature death symptoms, which will give the medicine make the person unconscious. So what do you think? Is it the right way to do it, or we shall let the person have clear mind to face the death?
Well, I think the first thing is to ask them what they would want.
Okay.
To explain to them that what you're going to give them is not going to hasten their death, if that's correct, but really basically put them to sleep.
Yeah.
I would say that if you explain that to the person and they agreed, and that they were in a state of mind where they could make a clear and decision for themselves, then I think that is what should be done. For example, in the Vinaya, it says one of the rules is that monks can't ask for anything special, or that I should say they shouldn't ask for anything special. Like if somebody invites me to their home and they said, "Bhante, is there anything special you'd like?" And if they asked me, I could say, "Oh yes, I'll have this and that, and etc." But I shouldn't ask them. I shouldn't say, "Listen, when I come to your house for a meal, I'd like a steak and kidney pie and peacock's tongues and pâté de foie gras and etc." Okay, that's one of the rules for monks and nuns. That's a good rule. However, in the Vinaya, the Buddha also says that if a monk or a nun is quite ill, they are allowed to ask for special things that they may need to help them to recover, and the Buddha specifically lists them, and two of them are meat and fish. The other thing is, and if you read my book on the subject, meat was widely used in India at that time. Vegetarian was very, very rare. Vegetarian doesn't seem to have been common in India until quite late. And there are, and I give the references to them, there are quite a few references of the Buddha eating meat. He went for Pindapata, somebody gave him some meat and he ate it. It's as simple as that. So I think primarily it wasn't much of an issue for him. That's what I think.